Good evening, everyone. We're truly glad to have you back with us tonight. If you've ever stopped by a 7-Eleven late at night, you know there's something strangely eerie about the glow of those fluorescent lights, especially when the world outside is silent. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another night of unsettling stories. You're watching Sleep Horror Stories. What happened to me was 100% real and easily the most disturbing thing I've ever experienced in my life. Some time ago, I worked as a cashier at a 7-Eleven just off the highway. Sometimes I worked during the day, but other times I'd pull the night shift, which is when this all happened. I got to work like usual, and everything seemed normal until two sketchy-looking guys came in. They were poorly dressed, rude, and one of them was carrying a black backpack. They headed straight to the coolers in the back, the ones where we keep the beer. They stayed there for a while, holding the door open as if they were trying to decide. But I didn't pay them much attention because I was busy checking out other customers. Once the line cleared, I noticed the two guys were walking back up to the register. I rang them up for several cans of beer, and they left immediately, tires screeching in their flashy SUV. A while passed. Around 1 a.m., a group of guys pulled up to the service window to buy some beer. By that time, the store was locked up for the night, so I had to grab the items and pass them through the window. I walked to the coolers to get their drinks. But as I reached inside to grab the beer, I touched something strange. It felt like air. Out of instinct, I yanked my hand back. Then I knelt down to see what I had touched. It was a human head. A man's severed head. I screamed at the top of my lungs. The shock was overwhelming. I ran back to the counter, grabbed my phone, and called 911. The customers outside were confused and asked if I was okay. But I couldn't even answer. I called the cops, then my manager. I told the guys outside to leave immediately, and thankfully, they did. A police cruiser showed up, followed by my boss. I explained everything to them. I said I had a strong feeling who might have done it. Those two men who lingered at the beer fridge for too long. They looked like trouble from the moment they walked in. Of course, they were never found. My manager warned me not to dig into it, so it was way too dangerous. I didn't stay long after that. I quit, but the trauma never really left. I still have nightmares, and anxiety haunts me to this day. The darkness some people carry inside them is beyond comprehension. This happened just a few months ago. After work, I stopped by a 7-Eleven on my way home to pick up a few things for dinner. I walked in and started grabbing what I needed. The place was oddly quiet. It was already late, and aside from a young guy at the register, I was completely alone. I kept browsing the aisles. But just as I reached the coolers, I heard something that froze me in place. Screams. Clear as day. A woman screaming for help. It was coming from a door in the back. I turned to look at the guy at the register, but he was acting completely normal, like he hadn't heard a thing. I stood still, waiting to hear it again. And sure enough, the screaming returned. I couldn't make out the exact words, but it was unmistakable. Someone was crying out, "Help me." I rushed to the counter to tell the employee what was happening. He looked at me and said, "Don't worry. It's nothing. That's just the cold storage room back there. No one's inside." He said they hear it almost every day. I stared at him in disbelief. But I can clearly hear a woman begging for help in there. He sighed and said, "Come with me. I'll show you there's no one inside. Just so you believe me." I hesitated. Something didn't feel right. But I couldn't live with the thought of someone actually needing help in there. So I followed him. Cautiously, He opened the door. It was a small walk-in room with boxes of soda and other drinks. But no one was there. Absolutely no one. We both stepped out, and he began to explain. He said his manager had told him and other coworkers that this sort of thing happened often, especially at night. That before this 7-Eleven was built, there was an old abandoned house here. A place where criminals had done unspeakable things. The house was eventually torn down, and the store was built just 2 years ago. But the cries from that back room began almost immediately after the store opened. Several cashiers had already quit because of it. I left that night with a heavy heart and fear riding in the pit of my stomach. Still, I admire that employee's courage. Having to work those night shifts completely alone. He was so used to the screams. He just ignored them. But me? I never stepped foot in that 7-Eleven again. It was a short experience, but one that deeply disturbed me. Hi everyone. For a few months, I worked the night shift at a 7-Eleven on the outskirts of my city. The store was located right off the highway, surrounded by nothing but trees and empty fields. The only other business nearby was a small diner next door, but it only opened during the day. I worked nights because it allowed me to take care of my kids during the day while my wife worked. One night, on my day off, something tragic happened inside that 7-Eleven. There was a bad accident on the highway nearby. It was raining hard, and the road was dangerously slick. My coworker, who was covering for me that night, later told me that a man came stumbling into the store, badly injured and asking for help. He called 911 right away, and emergency services showed up quickly. But there was nothing they could do. The man had lost too much blood. He died right there, inside the store. I remember the store was closed for the rest of that night and the next. I was told not to come in until the investigation was done and the police cleared the scene. The next night, I went back to work. To be honest, I was a bit on edge. My wife told me not to overthink it, that nothing would happen. But I'm a pretty superstitious guy. I believe in the paranormal. And from the moment I walked in, the place felt heavy. It's hard to explain. It was like something invisible was weighing down on the whole store. Everything went smoothly until around 2 a.m. when I headed to the bathroom. That's when I noticed muddy footprints down one of the aisles. Not just smudges. Real, wet footprint from shoes. I was confused. No one had walked in for a while, and I just passed by that spot earlier. The prints hadn't been there. And to make it weirder, the weather had been dry all day. I didn't want to dwell on it, so I grabbed the mop and cleaned it up. Then I went to the bathroom. But when I came back out, the muddy footprints were there again. There were no cars outside. No one had come in. And the door had a bell that chimed every time someone entered. It hadn't rung. At that point, I was scared. I cleaned the floor again and sat behind the counter. But then, I felt it. That sudden chill running through my spine. Goosebumps. Shivers. I was cold, but it wasn't the temperature. It was something else. The atmosphere was downright terrifying. Lonely and sad. Around 6 a.m., a woman came in with her son. They started picking out snacks, and as they walked down the same aisle, I heard her say to the boy, "Watch your step, honey. Don't step in that mud." I jumped up immediately. And sure enough, the muddy footprints were back. I cleaned them up one last time. Finally, my shift was over. Later that day, I texted the co-worker who had been there the night of the accident. I asked him if he remembered what time the injured man came into the store. He said he'd checked the time of the 911 call. He sent me a screenshot. It was exactly 2 a.m. The same time the muddy footprints had appeared. I didn't think twice. I quit. Didn't even tell my wife until after. I just couldn't work there anymore. The idea of being there at night again terrified me. I just hope that poor man found peace. Good evening. My name is Joseph Allen. I worked for a year at a 7-Eleven in my city. For those unfamiliar, it's a convenience store chain found on practically every corner across the U.S. The one I worked at was in a rough part of town. A lot of homeless people around, and many others using drugs late into the night. Because of that, my manager told me that after 11 p.m., I had to lock the doors and only serve customers through the security window. I worked the overnight shift. This happened during my second week there. It was almost 11 p.m., and I walked over to the front door to lock it. Just as I was reaching for the lock, a man suddenly appeared behind the glass. He looked desperate, and he pleaded with me to let him in. Said he was freezing. He looked awful. Pale, sunken eyes, lips nearly purple. Like he was really about to die from the cold. But it didn't make sense. It was spring, and we were in the middle of a heat wave. Almost 90 degrees out. At first, I thought he was just another homeless man who had taken something. Something that messed with his head. I was told never to let anyone in, no matter what. I apologized and told him I couldn't open the door. But if he needed help, I could call an ambulance. He didn't answer. Just kept crying and begging, pounding on the glass, asking me to let him in. I repeated that I couldn't, but that I'd get him help. I turned around to grab my phone from the counter. It took me less than 5 seconds. But when I looked back, he was gone. Vanished. No footsteps. No sound. Nothing. I was shocked, but honestly, a little relieved. The guy made me really uncomfortable. The next morning, when my coworker came in to take over, I told him what happened. But he wasn't surprised. He even described the man. In detail. Exactly how he looked down to the clothes. I asked how he knew. Had he seen him before? He said, "Joe, I don't know how to tell you this without freaking you out. But you should know in case he comes back." Then he told me the story. 2 years ago, a homeless man died right outside that 7-Eleven. He slept there most nights. Until one cold night, they found him the next morning, frozen to death. Since then, multiple night shift workers had reported seeing him, always around the same time, always begging to be let inside. Even the guy telling me the story had seen him once. It had apparently become a routine haunting. After that night, I dreaded going to work. I started job hunting like crazy, and eventually found something else. I stayed at the 7-Eleven for a year total. But thankfully, I never saw him again. Still, it's something I'll never forget.